The Departed is a Boston-set crime thriller directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Matt Damon, Jack Nicholson, and Mark Wahlberg. The movie follows a tense cat-and-mouse game between an undercover cop and a mole in the police force. Billy Costigan, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, is infiltrating the Irish mob, led by the ruthless Frank Costello, played by Jack Nicholson. And Colin Sullivan, played by Matt Damon, is a corrupt cop secretly working for Costello while rising through the ranks of the Massachusetts State Police. You know, I've always had a weird relationship with The Departed. As a guy who loves crime films and considers Marty my favourite director, I was really underwhelmed when I watched The Departed. I remember thinking, is that it? And when I learned it was a remake of a terrific Hong Kong film, not even 5 years old, it made the movie feel pointless. I was just put off by many things, irritated by it. But I rewatched it a lot, perhaps more so than any other Scorsese film I've seen, trying to see what I was missing, what everybody else saw in it. But I think these viewings just made me end up hating it. But in recent years, I've kind of warmed up to it. I remember coming home recently after a long day and having Scorsese's newer, slower-paced, methodological films in my mind, Killers of the Flower Moon, Silence, The Irishman. The Departed was on TV and it made for a remarkable change of pace seeing something so kinetic and energetic. It just clicked with me. Things I found abrasive, ugly and irritating before, like the ADHD camera work and the blink and you'll miss it editing style, suddenly felt thrilling and daring. Maybe I should do a video on my evolving thoughts on the film. And though I'm no longer a hater, I do still think the film has problems that would always be present. The poor CGI blood effects, for example, which have unfortunately been common in Scorsese's later works. The plot has a lot of contrivances as well. I mean, what are the chances the mole and the rat are both seeing the same therapist, let alone both romantically involved with her? But today, I wanted to talk about a plot element a little more in your face, and that is, how could Frank Costello not realize that Billy was the rat in his crew? I mean, it seemed so obvious. If for nothing else, Billy spent the entire film shaking and squirming like a nervous wreck. Costello came off as an idiot for not being able to work it out. It's always been one of my biggest gripes with the film, and today I wanted to discuss this, attack it and defend it, and also talk about an alternative theory that maybe Costello did know Billy was an informant. So in terms of Frank not being able to work it out, I mean, it's well known that Billy used to be a cop. The cover story is that he was kicked out, did time behind bars and is now out. Heck, the film has Costello lampshading Queenan's plan when he's beating Billy up. He literally spells out the plan. Not only does it seem eye-raising that a former cop would be allowed in the mob, but later in the film, when it is established there is an informant, an actual cop as Costello says, he's none the wiser as who it could be. I wonder, could it possibly be the former cop that recently joined your crew and after this you started getting all your problems? It seems like Frank has like 6 guys working for him and at least 3 have been with him for years, so maybe the problem is the new kid, the former cop. Not to mention, Billy hasn't been put to the test, he hasn't killed. In fact, he openly contemplates to Frank his lack of willingness to commit murder. Surely this would be a red flag. Isn't there usually a scene in these kind of movies where the youngster is put to the test? At the very least, surely it makes sense to take Costigan out just to be on the safe side. It's not like he's essential to the organization. There's a scene where French has everyone write their real names and bank accounts and tells them to stay in the warehouse so they can be checked. Billy is the only one who walks out. Frank even later questions him on this, saying,
"Why don't you stay in the bar? That night I got your numbers. Social security numbers. Everybody's fucking numbers."
Frank also spells out obvious red flags regarding Billy, saying, "I got this rat, and see Billy, like you're the new guy." So all in all, for me, it was staring Frank right in the face that Billy was the informant, and for him not to realize was unrealistic and dumb. However, I'll now try to defend Frank's ignorance, and let me know what you think of my arguments. So first off, regarding the scene where Billy walks out, this to me felt like a clear signal that he was the rat and was trying to get as far away from a possible whacking as possible. Of course, what he's actually trying to do is find out who the mole is in the police force, knowing Costello is going to hand over the citizen's envelope to the cop, which initiates the chase scene, which we've analysed in a separate video. That's the main reason he's trying to get out of there. He's following a lead and he almost got the mole. There isn't really that much for Billy to fear with a background check. It's already known he used to be a cop, and it's been established in the film that he doesn't get regular pay but will get a bonus at the end of his assignment. Sullivan typed his name wrong in the computer, which is why nothing came up, which is talked about towards the end of the film when the two men meet. It's also worth mentioning that Billy may have also genuinely panicked in this scene. It's a scary situation. He doesn't know how high up the mole is. His secret could get exposed here and he might get popped. But he makes a stink of it and walks out. A kind of double bluff. The kind of action that a rat would do. So if someone who is actively trying to show he isn't a rat does it, surely he can't be the rat. Maybe that was the thinking here. In any case, Frank doesn't completely buy it and puts Billy to the test, saying he smells a rat, pulling a gun on him, interrogating him. Whatever Billy said at this sit-down must have worked somewhat, as later French says to him, some people answer the questions right and some don't, while Frank is covered in blood, implying they took someone out. Although they would put Billy to the test again after this. But going back to the rat conversation, I've looked at the screenplay to the film here, and it seems Costello was impressed by Billy's brazenness in this scene. He pushes back against Frank's accusations, saying he'll put a bullet in his head if he accuses him again, and Frank was surprised and impressed at some of his answers, like when Billy says it must have been someone who can think they can do what Frank does, and when Frank asks Billy if he could be him, Billy says he probably could be, but doesn't want to. These are not the kind of comments a person desperately trying to exonerate themselves would make. Plus, Billy flips the script, suggesting the rat is not a new guy, but someone who's been with Frank long enough to be disgruntled, and he adds that he doesn't pay much. Billy is essentially playing the part of a careless, reckless, cocky contrarian who doesn't care about being suspected of being the rat because he's absolutely sure he isn't the rat, and Costello buys it. It fits with the kind of public persona he's developed for himself. He beats the guy in the cranberry juice scene, not knowing who he was. Multiple times in the film he pretends to be dumb, not knowing what a bookkeeper is, not knowing who Lennon is, thinking he can take on the guys from Providence by himself. He's upfront to Frank and French to the extent that they can't believe he has the balls to say the things he does. Of course, it doesn't completely work, as later Frank gives information to Billy, but gives him the night off. And said information doesn't make it back to Sullivan, because Billy already deduced it was disinformation and Dignam would have probably sat on the info, leading Frank to say, "It ain't Billy, no way," he says. And it's at this point that it seems Frank is satisfied that Billy isn't the rat. He almost seems confused, as if he was sure that this would be what catches Costigan. So there was a fair bit of testing going on throughout, not to mention the earlier interrogation where Frank batters Billy's arm. It's also worth mentioning that the crew isn't of course made up of 6 people. Costello has more, we just tend to follow the same guys, and we see more of them during the Chinese deal. Frank also mentions that when this happened in the past, he would just kill everybody. An implication here is that rats are nothing new, it's happened before. Plus, the cops already knew about things like the microprocessors before Billy was even on the scene. That must have come from inside work. The movie could have also depicted the passage of time better, I feel. Towards the end of the film, Billy is asked how long he was undercover and he just says long time, instead of giving us reasonable exposition. Sometimes it feels like the operation lasted a few weeks, but early on in the film, Billy complains that it's been over a year of this shit, so it wasn't like he became a Costello confidant overnight. We're obviously supposed to believe the trust building was a slower, gradual process after Billy went on loads of jobs with the crew. On Billy never killing, it's difficult to get around this. You'd think if Costello was suspicious about him, he might force him to do something a cop wouldn't do. But I guess a lot of these guys are not actual killers, they're thugs and thieves, and Billy was one of them. That's the only explanation I can offer. It's a bit like in my video on why nobody just shot Omar in The Wire. The assumption is that all gang members were killers and packing, when muscle, i.e. killers, were a small specialized role in the organization. Costello's insurance policy, i.e. Sullivan, perhaps made him a bit sluggish and too reliant on Colin, in the sense that he thought, well, if Billy was the rat, my guy on the inside would have known about it by now. And let's not forget, Frank himself is a protected FBI informant, so perhaps he asked them and they came back saying they weren't aware of Billy being undercover. One key thing to note regarding Frank is his sentimentality towards Billy. Costigan's uncle was part of Costello's crew, and his own father had a good reputation in spite of him having no part in the mob. French says he knew Billy's family and his grandmother was nice to him. The point being is that Billy has this kind of protected status where he's almost the prodigal son returned. Any insecurities Frank has regarding Uncle Jackie, he can put right through Billy. He even verbalizes this somewhat when he toys with the idea of Billy going back to school, adding that if Billy's father saw him sitting here next to Frank, he'd go through several people to kill Frank. It weighed heavily on Frank, and I think there is an element where Frank didn't want Billy to be the rat, and he wouldn't kill him unless he was absolutely sure. He admired Billy's guts, his determination, a boy who had a tough upbringing. Costello's monologue in the beginning of the film suggests he believes a man makes his own way, makes his own luck, and perhaps he feels Billy and he are cut from the same cloth. He expresses frustration with Colin throughout the film. Perhaps some of this stems from feeling like he delivered everything to Sullivan, that everything he has got is because of Frank, but Billy is more of a man, the son he never had. We've discussed some of the themes of masculinity, fatherhood and impotence in a separate video, but there must be some of this going on in Frank's head, the idea of Billy as a surrogate son. After all, he isn't able to have kids of his own, as implied by Colin saying, "Is that what this is all about? All that fucking and no sons?" Certainly Billy was trusted more than most. Costello even had his lawyer send Billy the incriminating documents towards the end of the film. So I hope I've covered the reasons Frank would have for trusting Billy well enough. There's also a rather out there theory, perhaps to cover up the apparent ridiculousness of Frank not working out that Billy was the rat, that Frank knew that Billy was undercover, but he chose not to take him out. The reason? Well, pretty much everything we just discussed. Of course, it's a bit of a loony theory, but given the way he thinks about Billy, treating him like a son, maybe he couldn't bring himself to have him offed. I'm not sure what the end game in this theory is, as Costello is the target of the investigation. Maybe Frank thinks he can turn Billy to the dark side. It doesn't quite work, especially given the "it ain't Billy, no way" scene, because that shows he actively suspected Billy and was trying to see if he was the mole. But in this theory, the reason why Frank would allow a rat in his crew and not immediately kill him is because he knew he was untouchable, as he had FBI protection. He had Costigan in the crew, with Queenan thinking he could get to Frank eventually. He had Sullivan in the Staties, and they both cancelled each other out, with there not being any real threat to Frank himself. So there you have it. What do you make of Frank not working out Billy was the rat? Do you think it was realistic? And what do you make of the theory that he knew all along but chose not to take him out? Let me know in the comments section below. Subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.